from the gully. Get the youths are coming from the gully. No TikTok on the streets, then we study. I count up the cash, tell mum if you not worry. I pray a different part and I chat it in a hurry from the gully. Get the youths are coming from the gully. No TikTok on the streets.
We talk about freedom of speech. We are talking about something substantive, and we're not simply talking about a formal notion of freedom of speech. And those who would call for the right to speak freely in order to openly prevent others from having rights and liberties that are guaranteed them by the Constitution, I mean, I think that is a contradiction in terms. I mean, if you're going to allow somebody to be free to advocate genocide, if you're going to allow somebody to be free to organize genocide, to organize murder and racism, then that doesn't make any sense at all. I think it's very clear.
And welcoming and listening to Ms. Davis' speech on the topic of oppression and repression. Thank you.
Before I get started, I want to thank all of you who participated in the vast national and international movement that demanded and secured my freedom. I recognize that had not it been for the efforts of thousands and millions of people throughout the world, I would not be standing here speaking to you this evening. This is the first time I have set foot on a college campus in California since I was fired from UCLA in June of 1970. It's a particular pleasure for me to be here this evening, since shortly after my acquittal, Ronald Reagan made it known that he was going to do everything within his power to bar me, not only from UCLA, but from the entire college and university system here in California.
At the University of California at Los Angeles, a new chancellor, Charles E. Young, was installed today. And though there were advance warnings of demonstrations and possible violence, nothing happened. And that, in these times, is news. ABC's John Davenport reports.
For a seasoned agitator, the setting was ripe for trouble, but nothing happened. The few radicals at UCLA tried to use Young's inauguration as a springboard for a demonstration, but they couldn't get one off the ground. During the last 2 days, they tried to force a general strike on the 30,000-student campus, but to no avail. When strikers took over the main administration building, instead of calling police, officials bid them welcome. The sit-in fizzled. Why the relative stability at UCLA? A few reasons stand out. It's a middle-class commuter college, unlike the live-in Berkeley campus. But unlike other streetcar colleges, such as NYU, Columbia, or San Francisco State, UCLA is not a bastion of the radical. It attracts moderates like Notre Dame attracts football players. And across town, the city's other major school, Southern Cal, has also been quiet. So, the city which spawned the warfare of Watts, ironically, is keeping it cool on the campus. John Davenport, ABC News, on the campus of UCLA.
Charles Hitch, the president of the University of California at Los Angeles, says it seems to him that every fall they start the school year with some kind of crisis. This year, it is Angela Davis, the black militant teacher, who says she is a communist.
Yesterday was the first day of the fall term at UCLA, and philosophy professor Angela Davis was on her way to teach her first class. Amid controversy, for Miss Davis admitted that she is a member of the Communist Party, and the regents who run the university decided because of that she should not be allowed to teach. They're not supposed to hold a teacher's politics against her, but this, they claim, was different. Governor Reagan led the opposition tour. His lieutenant governor explained it.
I don't think this is a question of political opinion. I can under no circumstances equate the Communist Party to the Republican or the Democrat Party. And so I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a woman who, by her own letter and over her own signature, has indicated that she feels that militancy and violence is the only way to solve the problems of today. I don't agree with that, and I don't think we want that on our campus.
On campus at UCLA, though, faculty and student body overwhelmingly support Miss Davis. Faculty members will meet Thursday to decide how to support her. A strike seems unlikely by the faculty, but they may decide to withhold grades in their classes until her class is accredited. If the regents fire her, she'll take them to court. For UCLA, it has become the crisis of the year. At 3 o'clock, in an auditorium where cameras were not permitted, there was an overflow crowd for Philosophy 99, for the teacher who was not supposed to be teaching.
Before I proceeded to lecture today, I asked the students whether or not they wanted me to teach. They indicated that they did, and therefore I lectured. And they indicated that they want me to continue to lecture.
Will you continue to teach?
Will I continue to teach?
Yes.
Yes.
I thought the lecture was amazing. It was an extremely fine lecture.
I think basically I was very impressed with her. I think she's a fine speaker.
Extremely interesting and provocative.
J. Edgar Hoover considers the Communist Party of the United States a grave internal threat. Many on campus consider it a bore, an irrelevancy, and are not greatly alarmed that Miss Davis, though a member of the Communist Party of the United States, should be allowed to teach a class. They feel that the regents, fearing a communist in a classroom, are overestimating the Communist Party and underestimating students. Jack Perkins, NBC News, UCLA.
I'm representing the Che Lumumba Club of the Communist Party. There is a conspiracy in the land, and that conspiracy is headed by Nixon, it's directed by Attorney General Mitchell, it's been issued to Yorty, that conspiracy has been agreed to by Ronald Reagan, and Chief of Police Davis is carrying that conspiracy out. Now what is that conspiracy? It's a conspiracy to wipe out, to murder every single Black Panther in America, and to wipe out the Black community as a whole. Brothers and sisters, this is genocide. We have to call it by
Angela Davis, a communist, she says, is an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of California. Today, her contract came up for renewal. The university regents said no.
Angela Davis, the admitted communist, has been teaching philosophy at UCLA this past year. She is controversial, but her students said she'd been a good teacher, and the university rehired her for next year. But today, in a rare action, the Board of Regents voted 15-6 to overrule the university and fire her. Governor Reagan voted with the majority. He said it wasn't because she's a communist, but rather because she is unprofessional.
Academic freedom does not include attacks on other faculty members or on the administration of the university or speaking to incite trouble on other campuses. Now, I think once again, in this particular case, we're talking simply about an issue of whether to hire or not. And this comes up a great many times, and there are many people who are who decided not to hire, and it does not become a great case in which publicly there has to be a debate as to why we chose someone else instead of this other individual.
While the regents were voting, Miss Davis was a few blocks away in a rally protesting the treatment of black prisoners in Soledad State Prison. She sees her dismissal as a case of political repression, which she may or may not challenge.
I'm going to keep on struggling to free the Soledad brothers and all political prisoners, because I think that what has happened to me is only a very tiny, minute example of what is happening to them. I suppose I just lost that job at UCLA as a result of my political opinions and activities.
Her supporters say there is no doubt Miss Davis was fired because she's a communist. Some UCLA professors plan to raise money to pay her salary so she can continue to teach. The controversy is not over. Don Oliver, NBC News, Los Angeles.
A kind of pleasure that people have refused in many ways to be accomplices of the kind of thing that Ronald Reagan is trying to push around. This is also an event which has a particular importance for me, to be able to speak here in California, in Southern California, in Orange County. And I think that this is especially a victory in light of the mudslide re-election of Richard Nixon. Most people call it a landslide victory, but I think it was a mudslide of racism and reaction. The topic of this event is very timely and very appropriate: oppression and repression in the United States. The major problem we are confronting today, the major problem people throughout this country are confronting, is the problem of racism. And I think that if the last 4 years are any indication of what is to come during the next 4 years, we can indeed predict a very catastrophic period within the history of this country. Black and brown and Asian and Native American people have always been the first victims of oppression and repression in this country. But I think that white people in this country, particularly white working people, should begin to understand that they too are exploited and they too can be victims of repression. On many occasions in the past, and especially during this recent period after the elections, I have used the word fascism.
We flirted with fascism before.
They wore Hitler's uniforms, but they wrapped themselves in the American flag.
But how are we seeing these images echoed in 21st century America? Well, the formula for fascism is surprisingly simple, and it gets repeated a lot. Fascism first takes root when politicians conjure up a faith in a mythic past, a past supposedly destroyed by liberals, feminists, and immigrants. For Mussolini, it was the Roman Empire. For Erdogan in Turkey, it's the Ottomans. Hungary's Viktor Orban rewrote the constitution with the goal of making Hungary great again. A line that sounded great to someone.
Did you ever hear this before? Make America great again.
Fascists create an overwhelming sense of nostalgia for a past that is racially pure, traditional, and patriarchal. From Mussolini to Hitler to Erdogan, fascist leaders position themselves as father figures and strong men.
I want to thank you for getting this country moving.
I can't thank you enough for the privilege that you've given me.
Greatest privilege of my life.
As long as he, and yes, it's always a he, remains in power, everything is possible. Without him, the whole system collapses.
I'll tell you what, if I ever got impeached, I think the market would crash. I think everybody would be very poor.
Once you've got your mythic past, you need the next ingredient: division. Whether it's between Germans and Jews, Hindus and Muslims, citizens and foreigners, whites and blacks, fascists succeed by turning groups against each other. The Nazis said Jews had no value because they supposedly did no mental or physical work. In Myanmar, the Rohingya have been denounced as rapists and criminals. a line which will sound familiar to many Mexicans.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
When you divide, it's easier to control. Once fascism has taken root, it spreads through propaganda, and in particular, a kind of anti-intellectualism.
They can make anything bad because they are the fake, disgusting news.
Fascists attack the truth because truth is central to a free democracy.
It's somebody's version of the truth, not the truth.
Truth is truth. I don't mean to go like...
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth.
This environment creates a petri dish for conspiracy theories. Have you seen this symbol at a Trump rally recently? It's a sign for a popular online conspiracy theory that the deep state is working to bring down Trump. It's not a million miles away from Viktor Orbán's wild campaigns against a global Jewish conspiracy.
Nagy testű ragadozók úszkálnak a vízben. Ez így Soros György határokon átnyúló birodalma, rengeteg pénzzel és nemzetközi nehéz tüzérséggel.
With truth under attack and lies running wild, no one can agree on what's true anymore, and fascists love it when that happens. You might think I'm trying to frighten you by making these parallels. And do you know what? I am. My parents survived the Holocaust. And my grandmother, in her memoir, wrote about how Jews in Germany didn't see the Nazi threat until it was too late. In 1937, we were still able to leave the country, she wrote. We could still live in our homes. We could still worship in our temples. We were in a ghetto, but the majority of our people were still alive. I want you to be scared. Because if you're not worried about encroaching fascism in America, before long, it will start to feel normal. And when that happens, we're all in trouble.
I have talked about an increasingly fascist danger which people in this country must begin to come to grips with. Some people have accused me of using rhetoric which doesn't have any basis in reality. But I think that we have to be very serious during these very critical moments. We have to understand that there is indeed a very real danger, menace of fascism in the United States today. I do not think that we have already entered into a period of full-blown fascism, because fascism is not something that suddenly explodes and erupts into being. If we look back into the history of the world, if we look at countries like Germany, Spain, Italy, we see that fascism is a process. It's something that grows and develops. It's like a cancer. It starts attacking one group of people, but like a cancer, it begins to spread out with a fatal rapidity, and eventually, like a cancer, it destroys everything around it. Once fascism does consolidate itself, and I think again we have to look towards the past, look at those countries where fascism did develop into its full-blown state. Once this happens, there is no possibility of resisting it and defeating it from within. Look at what happened to Germany. Look at Italy. It was always defeated from without. And I would ask you to tell me one thing. If you can conceive of such a fascist order developing in this country, who would liberate us? Who would be able to liberate a country whose government possesses enough weaponry and enough nuclear capability to destroy every single person in the world many times over? And I know many of you probably do not agree with me that we are embarking upon a period which could lead in the direction of fascism. But I would urge upon you to weigh what I'm going to say very seriously.
When you are done with the stairs, move back. Replace us.
Because your fate may very well depend upon it. If we look to fascist countries in the past, one of the things that becomes very clear is that the government or the class in power has always sought ways and means to divide the people. And when you talk about divide and rule, divide and conquer, that's one of the age-old strategic themes of oppressors and exploiters. And it's within this context that I want to say a few words about racism. Racism as it affects, in the first place, black people, Chicanos, Puerto Ricans, Native American, Asians. And racism as it also affects those white people who become its unwitting pawns, its unwitting weapons, its unwitting instruments. I don't think that too many people would disagree that there was indeed a lot of racism in Tricky Dick Nixon's campaign. That indeed I don't think that very many people would disagree that there was some kind of attempt to pit white people against black people. Look at the statement that he made about busing. And look what followed that statement. The events in Canarsie, New York, Brooklyn, where white adults threw stones. We're going to have, right on, sister, and we're going to have a question and answer period as soon as I finish this presentation. Okay, right on. In Canarsie, New York, white adults threw stones at black and Puerto Rican children and threw eggs in their faces, spat on them, and called them all kinds of vicious, racist names. And I think we have to understand the connection between that statement that Nixon had made only a short while previous to that and what happened in Canarsie. And I think we have to understand the connection between the kinds of things that Richard Nixon has been saying and what happened yesterday at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. You see, it is no accident that precisely at this moment we appear to be returning back to Little Rock, Arkansas. We are returning back to Orangeburg because Orangeburg preceded Kent. You know, black students had been killed already in a protest situation before these students at Kent State were killed. But because of the racism that is so deeply embedded in this country, the reaction came only when white students were killed. But let's try to understand, first of all, what racism is all about. Let's try to understand its source and who it benefits. Because I maintain that racism does not benefit the masses of white people, and that white people have just as much an interest in fighting racism as black people and Chicanos and Puerto Ricans and Native Americans and Asians and First of all, let's ask ourselves, who does racism aid? And I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that the beneficiaries of racism are not the masses of white people, but the vast capitalist corporations in the country. And you see, when I talk about capitalists, I'm not talking about the small businessman, the person who has a corner drugstore or a corner grocery store. See, that's what Richard Nixon wants us to think black capitalism is all about. But you see, capitalism today, when we talk about capitalism today, we have to look towards the General Motors, the Standard Oils, the IT&Ts, the General Electrics, the Bank of Americas, and I could go on and on. But actually, I couldn't go that far, because the number of people in this country who control the majority of the wealth is extremely minute. If you take the 100 largest corporations in this country, they already control 50% of the wealth. And then you take the 200 largest, and you find out that they control practically all except 15% of the wealth in this country. But then 70% of all income taxes are paid by working people. Does that sound right? Sounds like there's something wrong with that. But let me try to explain for a moment how racism affects people of color, and black people, Chicanos, Puerto Ricans, and all people of color in this country. If you take working people of color, and I'm using government statistics that the government has given us, you find that there is a $28 million differential. That is to say, black people alone account for a $21 billion super profits. And so I'm talking about the profits that the capitalists get over and above what they would get if there were white same profits. But then if you add Chicanos and Native Americans and Puerto Ricans and all other people of color in this country, you end up with $28 million in extra profits that the capitalists put in their pockets just because of the existence of racism. Just because of the existence of racism. And that's a lot of money, because we could buy a lot of houses and build a lot of schools and a lot of child care centers and a lot of the things that we need in the ghetto and the barrio with that $28 million. But you see, racism serves yet another function, and that is the disruptive, divisive function. Because you have a situation where, while white workers can rant and rave about black workers, that makes them forget that the exploiter is also on their backs too. And what it does is it destroys the possibility of creating a movement that's going to be able to overturn the exploiter. And that's the divide and rule function. If we look again towards the past, back into the past, if we look at Nazi Germany, we can see that the function of racism can be very similar to the function of anti-Semitism in promoting and encouraging fascism and allowing fascism to develop to its full-blown state. Because you see, while the masses of Germans were being busy being anti-Semitic, the German capitalists were squeezing more sweat and blood out of them. And if white people don't watch out in this country, that is exactly what is going to happen. Because there's already been the wage freeze. And there's already been this massive unemployment. And there's already been the assault on workers' right to strike. And we have to try to put all of these things together to see where we're going. But let's try to look at what is happening in this country today. Let's try to talk about some of the real indications of a developing fascism. We already mentioned what happened in Canarsie. We already mentioned what happened in Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana yesterday. But let's try to put some of this into context. And let's talk about what Nixon consciously did in modeling his election campaign. His election campaign was modeled along the most blatantly racist issues that we have seen in recent years. And you see, a lot of people wondered why George Wallace didn't run this year. He probably would have gotten far more sympathy in his present state than 4 years ago. But I think that there is no doubt about the fact that Richard Nixon demonstrated that he is not only George Wallace's bedfellow, but that in a lot of ways he knows how to out-Wallace Wallace. Because you see, in a lot of ways, the Nixon is a little bit more clever, a little bit shrewder than George Wallace, so he can get much further. But there is something else which points to what I would call a racist conspiracy from the very, very high ranks of the ruling powers of this country. And what is that? I know a lot of us kept waiting for George McGovern to say something about the need to respond to what was happening in the ghettos and the barrios. And we kept waiting. And we heard Nixon and all of his racist nonsense. And I think that at this particular historical moment in our country, we have to be very much concerned with building organizational forms. If we don't, we may very well be facing an era of extreme repression, an era of intensified racism, and I think that we are beginning to see the beginnings of that now. And the reason for that is that with the ruling class in such a condition now, with the president, the person who tries to be president under the kind of justified attack, with the whole administration crumbling, they're going to try to prevent the development of any kind of a united, multinational movement among the people in this country. And racism is the way you prevent that. Repression is the way you prevent that.
And 54% of all black families are not even able to live a decent life if you use the standards that have been established by the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor. 54%. The fact is, in 1976, 60% of black youth could not find a job. And you talk about black women. Hey, we haven't had it this bad in a long time.
Say me I fi go and feed. Know me and a rat, but me I go there for the cheese. So that up on my back and you know them I fi eat. So don't test me kill your blood clean. Yeah, hear me? Me say me I fi go and feed. Know me and a rat, but me I go there for the cheese. So that up on my back and you know them I fi eat. So don't test me kill your blood clean. From the gully, get the youths that come up from the gully. Don't take that first Christmas. Ain't really get shit I asked for. My wish list was feeling typed down. So bro, she said they hit